Hey everybody, it is Saturday afternoon and we are going to take a trip around the world. I got distracted. I had already started this video and I got to laughing at myself. I shot an update on this video yesterday, and in it I left a pause so that I could cut in a video of what the tank looked like before I'd started doing my chemi-clean treatment on it, and I totally forgot to do that. I just went ahead and posted the video, so I was laughing at the idea that I've got a video out there with this awkward pause where I'm allowing myself some edit room and then never edited. Anyway, if you didn't watch that video, I am doing a chemi-clean treatment on my 40-gallon waterfall tank here. I'm sort of the first stage into it, and it's going remarkably well. If you had seen the before video that I never posted, you would have seen how green and slimy and like it just, you know how it gets with that cyanobacteria, just gets to crawling all over everything. It kind of looked like that, and this is just after my initial couple doses. I have put more than one dose in there, but I've only now just done my first sort of water change to get everything cleaned out, and in time we're going to put another dose in there and really hopefully finish it off a little more seriously. You can kind of see the tip of this wood right here. You can see that dark green. That is some living cyanobacteria, so it's still in there and it's still growing, but it's nothing like what it looked like 4 or 5 days ago when I started this treatment. Other than that, not a lot going on with the waterfall. Just kind of waiting on springtime to happen, and then we'll see what happens from there. My daylily here is putting out new growth. All of this stuff is new. All of the old stuff, I guess it was last year's growth, is all dead and gone. That looks a little pale and spindly, so it probably is a little undernourished. That wouldn't surprise me for the water conditions that it's in. I will say the same for my fairly new bird's nest fern. You can see how sort of pale yellow it's getting. I'm even getting some brown burn spots on the leaves. So I think I need to give that just a tiny little dose of some general purpose fertilizer or something, but I want to be really careful as to how much of it goes in here. You know, it's got stuff in it that might overdose how much I want to put in my aquarium. So being that more or less is in the same system as the aquarium, I can't just water it right there where it is if I'm going to be watering it with plant food. So I'll have to, you know, I don't know. I'll think about how I'm going to do that. I'll probably just pull it out of there, feed it a little bit, and then put it back in, and we'll see how it goes from there. My plants here that I got on the side, this is red tulips, and you can see those little green tips poking out. We're getting closer and closer to having some spring flowers here in the fish room. These are daffodils. These are ice follies. They're really pretty white with sort of a pale inner cup. And then over here we have King Alfred, which is another daffodil. And so far I don't see any of these coming up. I did buy these for $5 for huge bags of them. They were leftovers from last year, sold at Walmart at clearance. So, you know, if some of them don't come up, that wouldn't surprise me. But clearly plenty of them are going to come up, so my $5 will be well spent if that's the case. That's about all I can think of with my waterfall tank. I will talk briefly about my foot tank here this week. I just did a big water change, and I mean an actual bona fide water change where I drew water out of the tank. I didn't just top it off. And I also pulled water out using my, I think of it as my power water changer, but it's a liquid transfer pump. And since this tank sits so low to the ground, I don't get a very effective siphon when I try to do a standard water change. So using that liquid transfer pump allows me to just pump it up and out. So I removed a ton of mulm out of there while I was clearing out the water. I got some odd results, I'll say. First of all, the water, as I was pumping it out, I was sitting down there on the floor, and I could smell the water going into this bucket, and it smelled sour. I don't know what to make of that. I've never really smelled sour water coming out of a fish tank before. Hopefully somebody else has, and maybe you've got an idea of what that is. I don't know, but I did sit down and shoot about a 10-minute video where I just kind of mulled around some ideas. There's a few other things going on in the tank that I didn't quite understand with the pH. you know, again, I don't want to really get into talking about it because I don't really know what's going on. I get really out of my depth when it comes to pH, so we may sit down and shoot a video about that specifically, or we may not. But I did shoot a video that is going to be on my Patreon page. That will be what I will call a rough draft video, me just sort of thinking out loud, getting my thoughts together about whether I really even want to shoot a video about that or not. But I did get some odd readings. Again, I got a really high pH, I got this weird sort of sour smell, and yet I should have a very low pH. I don't know what that sour smell is coming from. Again, I tossed around a few ideas, but since I don't really have any clear idea, I don't want to talk too much about that. But if you've got some suspicions, let me know, because I would be really interested to hear your thoughts on why a tank that's been sitting for a very long time would have a high pH when I was expecting a pH of 5.5 or 6 at the most, and it was 8. So, no idea why I've got a pH of 8 in that tank. It should be through the floor, and it's higher than any water I've got anywhere in my house by a long shot. So, I don't know. Again, if you've got some ideas, let me know. Maybe we'll talk about that again in the future. If you're interested to hear my preliminary rambling, sort of thinking out loud thoughts, then well, that's on my Patreon page. You'll have to go sign up for that to see that, but whatever. We'll talk about that in the future. Now that we're done with all of that, let's get on to my Peripheral Tanks here. This is my 29 miscellaneous, and not too terribly long ago, my angelfish that was in this tank died. And I've been having some really odd changes in the tank, I guess. Anytime you change anything in the tank, it's going to have some sort of an impact on the tank. A lot of times this won't be noticeable. If you add a couple of fish, if I threw a few neons in there, it probably wouldn't affect the tank very much. But if you think about the amount of bioload that big angelfish was generating, it was probably about the equivalent to all of those skirt tetras in there put together. And so when he died, it just sort of changed the biology of the tank. It's also changed the behavior. The skirt tetras don't swim around in such a tight school. I guess maybe not having a large predatory fish in the tank anymore has made them feel a little more casual and relaxed. But I really miss having an angelfish in this tank, so sooner or later, one of these days, we're going to get another one back in there. The odd thing I've noticed in this tank is growth, or dust, or detritus, or something. You see the stuff that's on the glass? I never used to get stuff on the glass in this tank. It was odd how little I got on this tank. If you just saw that little flicker back there behind the intake is my clown pleco. That's another thing. The clown pleco has gone from hiding in the caves on the bottom and rarely being seen. It now hangs out on the back glass behind the filter intake on a fairly regular basis. I see it back there all the time, and that's new. That pleco's been in there for quite a while now, at least a couple of years. I realized the other day it's been well over a year since I've been to a fish store, so it's been quite a while since I've put any new fish in any of my tanks. Anyway, it's odd that the changes I'm getting. The behavior in the fish is not that unexpected or unusual. You know, again, a big predatory fish is no longer in the tank. It's going to change the way the other ones behave. But what is this stuff on the glass? It looks like algae. It almost looks like hair algae, but when I went to wipe it wipes off like it's nothing more significant than detritus that just brushes right off of the glass and is gone. And it's the same way, if you can see how it's sort of all over the plants, it's the same way. If you just brush those plants, that stuff just dusts away like it's just dust that's settled on the surface. So I don't even know what that is, but I've never had it in this tank before, and my angelfish is gone, and now suddenly I'm getting all this weird fluffy stuff around the tank. It's strange. I don't know. But that's about all I can think about as far as what's going on in the tank. I haven't done anything new. There's no additions. I did lose one of my skirt tetras. I did find a skirt tetra dead, very dead, and stuck to the filter intake a few days ago. So I got that out of there and cleaned that up. So, all right, we're already almost 10 minutes in, and we've barely gotten started. This is going to be a doozy today. I'll try to pick it up and move along a little quicker. 55-gallon Gourami tank. Not a whole lot to talk about in this tank. I'm going to be getting in here soon and doing some more maintenance. I've got the algae that does grow on the glass in this tank. You can see how much I've got it on the glass. I just wiped the glass down a few days ago for the sake of sitting in front of this tank and shooting a video, and I never sat down and shot it, and now I've got to wipe the glass down in this tank before I sit down and shoot a video in front of it again because it's that covered in stuff. I literally have to get in here every few days and clear this tank off. I don't know why this tank in particular has the glass. I mean, the last time I did it, I scrubbed it with my melamine sponges, which I thought would remove any of like the sort of the last little, you know, you leave any traces of it behind, even if you can't see it, it just starts growing back immediately. And I scoured, and I thought I must have gotten it all off, but clearly you can see it just growing right back. So not sure what to make of that. Anyway, just an observation. My next goal is going to be getting in here and thinning out all of that. That is Java Windelov. So once I do that, I will have a lot of Java Windelov. I will also say I've had a lot of people buy plants over the last week or so, and I'm running kind of low at the moment. So over the next few days, I probably will not have a lot of plants, at least until I get into a couple of my tanks and do a little bit of maintenance. So for whatever that's worth, I'm going to throw that out there too. I did notice this morning, if you will see the algae starting to grow on the glass, I'm finally starting to get that fuzzy, sort of long, hairy looking stuff growing off the glass. I like that. We'll shoot a video later talking about that specifically. There is sort of a history of that in this tank, and I'm kind of sad that I got rid of it all long ago because it was beautiful in this tank, and now it's barely in there at all anymore, but I'm happy to see it looks like it's starting to come back. So again, we'll be talking about that probably next time we talk about this tank specifically. I've just got too much to go over today to talk about that right at the moment. Angelfish, being a fairly new addition, has settled in quite well. I was a little worried for the first day or two. It didn't seem like it was very happy, especially when the loaches would pay it extra attention. But it has settled in nicely, and now it comes right up to the glass. As soon as I come in, it waits for food and everything else. And again, just to give you an idea of scale, that's a pretty significant size angelfish. And that's not even right up against the glass. That's back in the tank a little bit. So, all right, we're going to move on to my 55-gallon tank. Now, this tank, all I will say about this tank is that I'm still waiting to sort of start cleaning this one up. I've been saying for a while now we're going to get in there, we're going to work on all that green, slimy cyanobacteria stuff. It's not hurting anything. It just looks kind of nasty when you see it. The fish are fine. It's not bothering anything, so don't stress out about the quality of the tank or conditions of the fish or the water or whatever. It's fine. However, it's not entirely fine because I've been sort of putting off doing the maintenance on this tank for that very reason. I keep saying I'm going to shoot this video, I'm going to shoot this video, and what I've been doing is I've been putting off all the maintenance, and I haven't been doing regular water changes on this tank. And about a week ago, I did a water change on this tank, and I checked the nitrate, and it was higher than I've ever seen in any one of my aquariums. It was this really strange red color. It wasn't like a dark red, like a maroon. It almost looked like a bright purple mixed with violet or something. Again, a really odd color nitrate test. It was alarmingly odd. So I did not a huge water change, but I did about a 10% water change. I came in a few days later. I did another 10% water change. Today I'm going to do another one, and I'm just going to work on bringing that nitrate level back down. I do have some pretty significant fish in this tank. In addition to all these diamond tetras, you can see I've got some hatchet fish. That angelfish is a reasonably significant bioload, but I've got a big pleco in here. And I've got a couple of catfish that always stay hidden that you don't see. I've got that bumblebee catfish in here, and I've got a little Synodontis lucipinus in here, which also account for more bioload. So there's reason to believe that I need to do more frequent water changes on this tank. All my tanks are different, and just because this is a 55 doesn't mean it's like my other 55, and this just has a much higher bioload and needs more frequent attention, and I've really been neglecting that. So once I kind of get that back under control and we get the water back to being reasonable, then we will get in here and we will start talking about how we're going to address all this cyanobacteria. Honestly, I'm probably going to start by removing a lot of that Anubias. I'm thinking about just sort of restarting this tank with some different plants and rescaping it. These monster Anubias are cool, but they've been in there for years and years and years, and you know, one part of me thinks like that's awesome. I like the nostalgia, the longevity. They've been in there for so long. The other part of me thinks it's just time for a change. I'm sick of looking at these same plants in this tank for so long. I don't know, maybe once we get them cleaned up and they look all pretty again, it'll be a different story, but whatever, we'll get to that when we get to that. That'll be a project coming up here soon. And I can pretty much say the same thing about this tank, with the exception of the high nitrate and bioload and all that stuff. This tank has very few fish left in it anymore, but the red cyanobacteria that's in this tank is just out of control. I've been just letting it grow unchecked for so long now. I really don't want to do anything with this tank. I've just been putting it off, and I know I have to, but again, the water's fine. It just looks ugly. It just looks like it's got cyanobacteria all over everything in there. But the fish, with the exception of the fact that they're in there singularly, that's one of the problems when you buy schooling fish. If you buy a school of little Raspora hets there, and 2 or 3 of them start to die off, do you go out and do you buy more of them, you know, to build the school back up? Because if you do, then you own these fish forever now. You can never have another type of fish. You know, at some point, you need to start letting the fish die off and letting those schools die away, and you'll have some fish that are living in there singularly or whatever. Again, not a big deal, not a huge stressor for fish like that to be living singularly. I know it's recommended to keep them in a group, but they're fine. They're just, again, they're fine. They're not, nothing's, no big deals going on in this tank. It just looks ugly. So like I said, we'll get to it. We'll get in there, we'll do some maintenance, we'll talk about it all, we'll do the chemi clean, the whole 9 yards, air stone, blah blah blah, and we'll get to all that whenever we get around to it. But that's going to have to take me feeling like it before we get to it. So moving on to my New World tank. I'll step back to get all this one in one shot. Love these 125s. They are 6 feet long, 18 inches deep, and by deep I mean front to back, and they are, I want to say 21 or 22 inches tall. Really nice sized tanks. You can put a lot of fish in them. Not much going on in there. I don't really have a whole lot to talk about, so we're just going to sort of have a look at it. I'll think anything I can say off the top of my head while we're in there. This is another tank. I was thinking about cyanobacteria earlier today, and how my cyanobacteria by now should be almost legendary on YouTube. I've got so much of it and I talk about it so frequently. But this tank is a perfect case of how I've got plenty of cyanobacteria in there. You see all that bright green stuff, but it's, who cares? It looks natural and normal, and it completely looks like it's part of the tank and part of the natural environment that the fish live in. This is one of those tanks where it just stays in check for some reason, and I don't have to do a lot with it, whereas I've got other tanks where it just grows out of control, and no matter what I do to it, it just seems to come back and comes back and comes back. And this tank is just kind of there, and you know, grows on the glass a little bit. I have to wipe it down sometimes. Every now and again I might have to do a little bit of something in there, but for the most part it just looks fine. You can also see how beautiful and rich the color and texture that wood is. That is because the big pleco I have in there has been munching away on that and keeping that scraped nice and clean, and the rocks and everything else stay kind of clean because of that too. So I try not to overdo it with the algae wafers. I try to let the fish feed naturally within the tank. That goes for the other fish as well. They eat algae, they eat the roots of the plants. Allowing your fish to feed naturally in your tank will actually help maintain your tank and keep stuff like algae and plant growth under control. So don't overfeed your fish. If you've got sources of food in the tank for them to feed on, let them feed on the tank. So there you go. That's about all I got going on in there. Not a lot to talk about. Not much to talk about in my snail tank here. Let me turn my fan off. I always forget to do that before I start these videos. I did have a massive mound of Java moss growing right there. It was acting as a living filter, and I ripped it all out because it was growing so much. You can see it was even growing up and attaching to the plastic up there. So that'll grow back in no time flat. In the meantime, I might get in here, you never know, do a water change. It's been many months since I've done one. The mulm is not 3 inches deep yet, but it's getting there, and you know, at some point maybe I'll get in there and do a water change. I did throw a piece of Java window love in there just for the why not of it. It's some living plant now, so the snails have something to crawl around on top of. But the key to keeping snails is to feed the tank like you're overfeeding a fish tank, because that's how we get snail explosions in our fish tanks. And so if you want a snail explosion in your snail tank, just feed it as much as you can possibly feed it. Well, this is my 40-gallon native tank, and we're going to make a little discovery here together. I saw a crayfish sitting out last night that looked odd. I wondered if it was trying to molt, but I didn't think it was. It didn't look like the back had split, but it was just sitting up on the rock over there and just sitting there. It didn't seem to move. It didn't seem to interact with the fish around it, or it didn't seem to react to me walking around. And that was the last I saw of it last night, and now we're seeing it there dead. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. Now, my first assumption, I'm sorry about all the glare on this tank, is one of the problems when you have a tank that is lit like this. All of that light just shines forward, and you know, it shines on my white shoes and everything else that's on the floor and everything behind me, and you just get glare in the tank. So there's not a lot I can do about that unless I want to take a considerable amount of time and set up backdrops and hanging cloths and all that kind of stuff, and you're just not on this kind of video. I just don't have time to set the room up like that for this kind of video. Anyway, my first inclination about crayfish and crayfish not doing well, not especially if they're not molting very well, or they're not having success in sloughing their shells. My first thought is my soft water. They need calcium for their shells, they need calcium for the molting process, and you just don't get it in my water. However, the water you're looking at right there, if we were to collect a sample of the water that I collected these crayfish from, and we put them side by side, you wouldn't be able to tell which was my tank water and which was the water in the stream. It's almost identical to the water chemistry I've got around here. And yet, we've now got another dead crayfish. So, at this point, hang on one moment here, I believe I'm going to start coughing. Yes, I was right, I did start coughing. Anyway, excuse that. I just don't know. I think we're down to this one crayfish. I haven't seen any other besides the two in a while, and now that is very clearly one. I don't think that crayfish is taking a nap. So there you go. Other than that, not really a lot to talk about with this tank. I did a big water change the other day. It was getting really tannin stained, and you know, just did a big water change. That's about all there was to that. Not a lot to talk about. My water sprite that I put up here is doing well enough. I kind of figured some of this stuff would fade back and die off just because of the change in environment when I moved it, and I would get new growth coming out, and the rosette in the center would just redevelop, and we're now going to get a whole new chunk of water sprite growing up and out off of that. So I like it in one sense, but at the same time, it makes the tank really dark, and you don't really get to see the shiny, sparkly reflections on the fish and that sort of iridescent blue coloration you get on those Gambusia. But whatever, we'll see. Moving on to my 125-gallon tank. This is another one we gotta step back and get all the way over here. Now, this tank, I recently moved a rainbow fish from my 40-gallon tank, and I put it in this tank. And when I did so, I was concerned that whenever you make changes, you always run into some kind of problems, and there's always some issue. And I was not expecting the issue to be any kind of water chemistry issue. I was expecting the issue to be more along the lines of societal. The fish were going to, have to reconstruct their group and figure out a whole new pecking order. And it can just be really disruptive when you put a new fish, especially a full-grown, mature fish, into a tank that's already got an established group and an established group pecking order. And so that was the kind of thing I was worried about. And what wound up happening was, I believe the fish probably bashed itself into something, swam into the end of the tank, being unfamiliar with its new surroundings. It swam into the glass, or it may have jumped and hit the top, may have hit the piece of wood, who knows. But I think it injured itself, and it was swimming around the tank really rough for several days. And when I came in on the day that I fully expected to be pulling its body out of here, it was nowhere to be found. And I looked and I looked and I looked. I even shot a video about it. I swirled everything around. I went through every single plant. The only spot I did not check was, it's hard to see because of all the glare at this end of the tank, but this is a big piece of wood. You can kind of make out the sort of general outline. It's kind of forked right here. Underneath of that is a big cavity. This is sort of a convex piece of wood, and it very well may have swum or even gotten swooshed by the current and gone down in there. I know I've never lifted that up. I didn't stick my hand down there. I didn't even stick the gravel vac down in there to see if I could pull anything up and out of there. So that would be my last resort assumption of where it could be. Honestly, though, I'm not worried about it. This tank's big enough that it can handle the loss of one fish without blowing up on me. We got my lily pads growing all over the surface here. Tank smells all right. Not smelling anything off or dead or rotten or fishy. So as long as that's the case, I'm not going to be too concerned about it. I've had more fish than I can count vanish without a trace over the years. Never one that big, I will grant you, but we are also talking about a 125-gallon tank that's got mad, crazy amount of capability for biofiltration. So, maybe if the tank was really warm, and that fish was really breaking down fast and decaying really quickly, I might start getting some raunchy, stinky smell. And I still may. It may still be doing that somewhere in the tank. And if that's the case, I will let you know, and I'll look for it more thoroughly, and I'll get it out of there. But as of now, everything seems fine. The tank smells good. Sniffing your aquariums is important. Get familiar with how they smell. Regardless of how it smells, get familiar with it. So if it smells different, that change in smell can alert you to some sort of change in what's going on in the tank. It's always good to be familiar with how your fish tanks smell. So, my 20-gallon Angelfish tank, this was the one I was doing all my big ChemiClean treatment on, and I did back-to-back-to-back super overdoses and whammy doodle. I just slammed this tank with the ChemiClean treatment. Some fish died. I don't think it had anything to do with the ChemiClean, and that's unfortunately the problem, is I will never know whether it did or not. But ultimately, over a course of a few weeks, I lost, well, it's probably even longer than that, maybe a month, 5 weeks, something like that. I did eventually lose my other blue neon tail. I'm not even sure what they're called anymore. Swordtail, blue neon guppy. I had 2 of those in this tank. I now only have 1. And I did have 2 of the Bloodfin or Glowlight Tetras. I honestly can't remember whether they were Glowfin or Glowlight or Bloodfin Tetras. And I lost one of them. I might have lost both of them. I honestly can't even remember now. I'm looking around and I don't see the other one. My Pleco is still fine. My Angelfish is still fine. We've still got that one guppy. And my my cherry barb in there is still fine. The only fish that we lost were fish that were either really sensitive, like my Farlowella whiptail catfish that I talked about a while ago. I did lose that one, but again, that had lived longer by far than any whiptail catfish I've ever had before, so I can't really say that that was the ChemiClean treatment. And then out of the other fish I lost again, these fish are ancient by their standards of age. You know, these guppies are 3 or 4 years old now. That's really old for guppies. And so for them to die off, that probably would have happened whether I did the treatment or not. You know, again, I'm not going to stress too much about that. The long and short of it is, it seems to finally have been a fairly successful treatment. When I was finally finished with the treatment itself, I left the air stone in the tank for several weeks. Just to keep the circulation going, just to keep the tank vigorously oxygenated, or at least keep the gas exchange as much as I can. I believe that slow-moving water, poor oxygenation, poor gas exchange, I believe all of those things contribute to the factors that allow the cyanobacteria to thrive in a tank. And so the combination of killing it off and giving it unfavorable conditions, I was hoping would really get it out of there. And so I finally took the air stone out about a week ago, and under normal circumstances this tank would have been green again within a week. That stuff used to come back in this tank with a vengeance and rapidly, and it still looks like this. So I'm pretty happy. We may have actually, knock on wood, gotten that stuff out of here once and for good, and we may go back to it just being, you know, a normal amount of cyanobacteria in my tank, like all my other tanks, you know, have a reasonable amount of cyanobacteria, rather than this tank that was just overgrown with it. I don't know what it was about this tank, but it was just nuts. So moving on, we will come here to my brackish tank, Butterbean's tank, whatever you want to call this tank anymore. I really need to get in here and do some maintenance. I've got shells all over the bottom. All that white stuff you can see on the bottom is shells from Butterbean's dinners past. Those are all snail shells. Most of them are ram's horn. Some of them are regular old pond snails. Some of the stuff is uneaten freeze-dried krill that sinks and then gets all fuzzy with mold and stuff growing all over it. Butterbean tends to get spoiled. You can see there's another little piece of krill that's down between those two rocks. He gets himself used to eating snails, which is good stuff. And then he just turns his little Butterbean nose up to the floating freeze-dried krill that I give him. And so a lot of times he doesn't eat all of it, or doesn't eat any of it sometimes, and it winds up staying in the tank. You can see, of course, this tank also has a lot of that red cyanobacteria. I will say I've absolutely convinced there is a correlation between salinity and red cyanobacteria. Red cyanobacteria thrives the more salt you have in the water. Even when I had a marine tank way back in the day, I had the red cyanobacteria in that tank like I've never had in any tank before. And this brackish tank used to have it much, much more significantly. And now that we're not even in brackish levels technically anymore, we get less and less and less of that red cyanobacteria the lower I make the salinity. So I'm convinced over the years that salinity absolutely impacts that red cyanobacteria, and it favors a higher salinity. It favors saltier water. So other than that, not really much going on. Can't really think of anything else to talk about with this one. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, since I feel like this has already been a pretty good, eventful, information-filled round-the-world update. So we're going to get back here to my 29 miscellaneous, and I'm going to say thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget to check out my Patreon channel if you're interested in that sort of thing. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.